Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we're piecing together the transformation of work one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today we're going to talk about longevity, or rather how longevity impacts careers. For decades, we built careers around a simple assumption. We would study when we were young, work for a few decades, and then retire. But when we routinely live in our 20s, when we routinely live into our 90s, retirement can last as long as an entire career. On the one hand, we see industries struggle to find talent and entire economies facing demographic decline. On the other hand, many people are reaching midlife and realizing they may have another 30 or 40 years ahead of them. That's too long to coast towards retirement. So how do we rethink careers when 50 is no longer the beginning of the end, but potentially the start of an entirely new chapter? My guest today is Lyndsey Simpson, founder and CEO of 55 Redefined and the author of The Age Rebellion, a book that explores what becomes possible when we stop viewing longevity as a retirement problem and start viewing it as an opportunity to redesign work, careers, and life itself. Lyndsey, welcome to the Future of Less Work.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was really looking forward to this conversation, and I will age myself here. In the old model, I'd be retiring soon, but I'm not going to do that. But I also don't really want to work as if I'm in my 30s. So what does career look like at this stage in life?
So we find that very few people in their current midlife, so in their 50s, in their 60s, maybe in their 70s, want a cliff edge as per previous generations. So previously we had that 3-stage life. We had education, then we had our career, and then we had retirement. But with a 100-year lifespan, it becomes a marathon rather than a sprint. And so the phrase I hear the most from people as they hit the age, perhaps Nirit, that you're now finding yourself in, is what they're wanting to do is live more and work less, but over a glide path. They don't want all or nothing of either. They don't just want to be retired and they don't want to be working 80 hours a week, but they want this tapering over 10, 15 years. But interestingly, along with that tapering of time, of how we deploy our time and our energy, we also start to search for things that are more purposeful, the things that are more have meaning, or just more interesting, a new industry, a new topic, something that's going to get us fired up again. But what we're trying to avoid is either these cliff edges where we just stop, or equally where we sleepwalk off of a cliff because we've never given enough thought about the future.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I think, so you're definitely right. I think once we figure out this idea that careers are cycles and sometimes you push harder and sometimes you need to do, a different mix of work and other things, we'll realize it's not just about age, because there are other phases in one's career. It could be, early child care. It could be years you need to take off to do some relearning or something, the reskilling. I don't know what we're going to call that. But I wonder if we have figured out how, because right now the cliff is because you work or you don't.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the middle.
There's nothing in the middle. One of my good friends who is also a fellow author is a lady called Helen Tupper. And she authored a book called The Squiggly Career, which talks about the fact that, again, most of our organizations, particularly our larger organizations, are built on this kind of pyramid of up or out. You're progressing or you're leaving. Whereas actually, again, what people want is sideways, backwards, changing function, reskilling, having a sabbatical for whatever reason, that could be caring for an elderly parent. It could be having a child yourself. Interestingly, we talk a lot about parental age, but it's just tipped in the US and in the UK and in many parts of the world that we now have more elder care workers in our workforce than we do have for those with childcare responsibilities. So we put a lot of our focus on the parental years, but actually we have just as many, if not more people now who are juggling caring for elder members of their family. And so for me, I think it's about creating these normal sabbatical processes where we do have the opportunity to ease out for 6 months and go back to college and learn a new skill, or take a break and just recharge our batteries rather than going full tilt until we're absolutely knackered out and then think that we want to retire and then actually find that 12 months into that, once we're rested and we've got the energy back, we actually want to go again and we feel like we've checked out of work.
Yeah. So that helps with kind of in and out, almost like sabbatical periods, right? But it doesn't help with the years where you want to work, but you don't want to work the same way. I know we see a lot of people, especially in the later kind of experienced years, when you can afford to.
Yes.
And it's not just about the pay. Go independent, start businesses. So actually use the independent economy to be able to gain that control over our lives, right?
Exactly. I mean, 100%. So the fastest growing cohorts of first-time entrepreneurs across North America and across the UK are over 50s. So they are first-time entrepreneurs starting their businesses. They are also 3 times more likely to run a profitable scale-up business than somebody that's younger than them. So they are more successful. They're using their crystallized intelligence from their learning and their life and their career thus far to do so. But we are also increasingly seeing shifts within the employers. So within 55 Redefined, we work with over 300 large corporates. And we generally lean towards the larger organizations, the multinationals, so the AXAs, the Amazons, the Warner Brothers, and the ilk across all sectors. And we are seeing that there is increasingly now a focus around how do we create more flexibility to enable people to continue to work into their 60s, their 70s and beyond. In fact, a number of our large employers have got significant proportions of their workforce in their 80s and 90s. So
how do you define flexibility? Because in the old days, work-life balance, right, was a thing that we talked about. And flexibility really was about how do you arrange your life around the work. It wasn't really about how do you arrange the work around your life. How do you define flexibility these days?
It has really shifted. So if I go back just even 2-3 years ago, the main 2 forms of flexibility were work location. So I could work remotely, work from home. And it was around part-time. So maybe I worked a 3-day week or a 4-day week rather than full-time. That actually isn't that interesting to people as they get older. They're like, well, if I'm still tired, as you say, to showing up every week, that doesn't allow me to go and travel Europe. That doesn't allow me to do the big tour of Australia. That doesn't allow me to do these things. And so flexibility, as we're now seeing it defined by employees and delivered on by employers, is more about the individual. So we're seeing some of our employers introduce 45 days overseas policy. So you can work 45 days anywhere in the world, as long as you're prepared to do the time zone of where your base location is. So Canada Life, so part of Great Western Group, who own Empower in the US and Canada Life, Irish Life, loads of great companies. They have this brilliant policy where if I want to be a digital nomad and go and spend a month in Lisbon, I can, as long as I'm prepared to work my hours remotely and tie back into my base location.
So the regular rest of the year is some other hybrid policy, like 3 days in the office, and then a month or 35 days, you can go do whatever.
Right. And the only reason it's 45 days isn't because the employer doesn't want to provide more flexibility, but that's just because our tax legislation, you have to have a domicile location. So are you paying British taxes or American taxes or wherever your base location is? The other thing that we see a lot of people doing is and this is where the lean towards more contract, more consultancy type work is that I want to have periods of being on and periods of being off. So I want to work 3 months and then I want a month off. I want to work 3 weeks in every week and then have a week off at the end of the month. Because again, the number one thing that we see across all of the cohorts, and we work with millions of people over 50 across our employers, the number one thing that they want is more travel time. And so they're not seeking actually to quieten down, slow down and just, kind of sit back at home and tend their gardens. They're wanting to explore the world, and you need time to do that and you need space. And so we're seeing where there's been the most pull from employers is where there are industries that are very dependent upon skills of older workers. So the energy sector, pharmaceuticals, where we have high skilled workers that can be a bit more demanding because they are holding the cards in terms of the future of that industry. Where it gets harder is where we get into lower skilled sectors, or retail and those environments where there's a higher demand from all employee categories, in which case it's then about the employer saying, well, actually, we want to mirror match our customers. And if our customers range from 20 years old to 100 years old, then our workforce need to mirror that as well.
Yeah, we've been saying that for many years with diversity in general, but we still had, and I don't know if it's ageism, per se, as in you look at a resume and you say, I don't want this person, they're 60. But we still had this perception that, the younger people came in, they had the energy, they had the ability to learn whatever new technology was on board, and they got the preference. And I'm wondering what AI is doing to this, because I can think of, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I was going to ask you about a flexibility in COVID, but if we jump ahead to AI is also about this new technology and this perception that the younger people understand it better and are able to address it better. Although a lot of the research shows that there's a lot of value in the experience.
It is. I mean, I'll level with you, Nirit. Not a single organization ever has reached out to 55 Redefined and said, we want to solve ageism, or we want to be nice to the older folk. Never happened, ever. What happens is they work out that they have an issue, a business commercial issue. Maybe they're running high attrition turnover in their contact centers or their stores, and they can see it's related to the age. Maybe they've got a higher complaints ratio or reduced net promoter score, and they're seeing that there's a correlation with the age of the people serving customers. Or maybe it's around how they're deploying technology, and they're understanding that actually there's been a shift change around how do you not just embrace technology, but how do you roll out that change management process within an organization? And so we solve things with data. We're a data-first organization. And so let me tell you a couple of the stereotypes, and then I'm going to get onto that AI question. So one of the things we hear more often, you mentioned the word energy. Well, energy is a personality trait. It has no correlation whatsoever to age. You'll have somebody who's 20 years old who's full of energy, somebody who's 80 years old who's full of energy, and exactly the same opposite. Someone who's got no energy who's 20 and someone who's 18 has no energy. It has nothing to do with age. And so we hear things from recruiters and from organizations of, I don't think I want to hire that person who's 62 because they're going to get ill. They're at that age, they're going to get ill. And COVID probably exacerbated this quite a bit within the media around vulnerability. But the data tells the truth. And the data is that an over 50s employee is 200% less likely to take a day off work sick than a colleague under 30. Billions of data points.
Yeah, or even just a day away from work. If you start accumulating all the other reasons younger people.
Exactly. And we were there. I remember in my 20s having a hangover and not wanting to do a Saturday shift in a contact center, but it's different. You show up, you have a different attitude towards work, and you have different reasons for being at work versus when you're in your earlier career. And so that plays out in the data. Likewise with attrition. So we often see that companies think, where they've got high volume areas, where customer services or, stores, branches, contact centers, and they think that the answer is to hire young people because they think that older people will not work for that pay level. Okay. But again, the fact is that 89% of people over 50 will take a pay cut to change industry, to learn a new skill, to do something different. So the pay's not the issue. And then when you hire people over 50 into those volume roles, we see a 5-fold reduction in attrition in the first 18 months. 5-fold. So it saves companies millions of dollars when they start hiring people and then not have to replace them every 6 months because they're not chasing an extra $1 an hour and they're not chasing the next move. They just want to learn something new and do something interesting. So that comes back to then this AI point. And this has had a real shift change. So I'm very fortunate on my board of directors. I have some brilliant Neds. And one of those is an executive for LinkedIn. So we do quite a bit of data sharing between us as organizations. And if I go back 2 years ago, all of the hiring for AI related roles globally was for young engineers. So it was coders, programmers, people straight out of college that could code the tech. The second that all of the off-the-shelf models started to drop, from Gemini to Copilot to Claude, the pendulum swung in the opposite direction to the oldest members of the workforce to be hired in and retained into the AI programs, because no one needs to build AI anymore. What we need to do is train it. We need to train the large language models. And if you think about a really simple scenario here. So let's say I'm an insurance company and I'm trying to create a chatbot that's going to triage the calls into my customer services team. Do I want a really young coder straight out of college who's brilliant with the tech because they can create the tech? Or do I want Julia, who's been working in customer services for 48 years, who knows the 100 different ways that people ask to change their address without actually saying, I want to change my address? You want Julia, but then you need to educate Julia around the knowledge and skills she has so that she can help you and spot the deficiencies and be that human in the loop when you're rolling out the tech.
And we actually see this there's a lot of research that shows that the experienced people know how to work with AI to actually get better results because they know how to ask, they understand the underlying assumptions, and they can keep doing the conversation. So I wonder if we fast forward this and we go back to the flexibility, and your point that I want to make sure we circle back to is flexibility is an individual conversation, right? It's basically what I need to keep working the way I need. If I am in a strong position, right? As you're saying, my employer might actually attempt to negotiate with me something that works for both of us. Yeah. But if I'm not, so if I am a customer service rep, that my employer can think, I'm replaceable, then why would they? And that takes a deeper understanding of the fact that if you have people who have no longer burdened maybe with childcare, maybe work for different reasons, maybe their pay situation is better, they bring a whole different set of
they do. I call it ROE, Nirit. So every organization, every board I walk into, they're all over their ROI. They know their return on investment. They look at people through the lens of pay, reward, and understanding what it costs to employ somebody. ROE is when we understand the data around return on experience. So what do we get from then an experienced individual, which is over and above their pay and reward? And so I'll give you a brilliant example. There was one of the world's largest consultancy organizations that operates every market in the world, who came to us about 3 years ago with a challenge, which was to help them offboard their over 50s senior people because they were expensive and they needed to cut some costs. And so they were like, let's show them a shiny world in a really supportive way beyond our organization. And so we was like, well, okay, we can help with career transitioning, but let's look at the data before we dig into that. And the reality was that, again, they had a misperception of age. So when companies talk in generations, no one ever gets older. Okay. So when they go, we don't have many boomers around here, you're like, well, most of your 50 plus workforce are Gen X. They're not boomers. Oh, and by the way, your millennial population will be in their 50s by 2031. So, you'll have 3 generations in their 50s. We're not just talking about your grandparents that you keep thinking about. And so we started to look at their data, and the stark reality they weren't aware of was that 40% of their workforce were over 50 or were going to be over 50 within the next 3 years. So I'm like, okay, so you want to exit 40% of your workforce. Then let's look at that employee workforce, not through a HR lens, not through a cost lens, but through a return lens, a return on experience. And it turned out that 40% generate 92% of global revenues across that consultancy organization. They had no idea.
They had no idea.
No idea. They'd never analysed the impact of age. And so suddenly so I'm like, so just checking, guys, you still want me to exit 92% of your revenue generators. And then strangely enough, the challenge then becomes not about exit. It becomes about how do we have a conversation with these individuals where we strike a deal there, they've got flexibility, we can get a line into how long they're planning to stay so we can succession plan. How do we give something to them that means they're more encouraged and incentivized to train the next generation through? And then you start creating a deal that's meaningful for the individual in the company.
So it's interesting because it always depends on how you measure, right? One of the things that comes to mind, I remember research about a contact center where if you measure people by how quickly they close the calls, right? Then the older population tended to be more, take more time and help resolve the issues, right? At some point, what happened was they actually created a contact center for the more complicated cases where they actually put in the older population, more experienced, that could have, those longer conversations.
Do exactly this.
But you needed to change how you were measuring return on.
So British Telecom is the largest telecoms provider in the UK. And they saw exactly this. They saw that if they looked through their contact center lens for their different brands like EE and PlusNet and various different brands, and they had a measure around call handling time. And so, you could see that as you looked at the measures around Net Promoter Score, customer handling success, everything tracked positively with age. So the older the employee on the call, the better the customer outcome, the exception being call handling time. And it was a measure. And so they started to dig into it. And it's because as we get older, we become more concerned about doing the right thing rather than being what we're being told to do. So yes, I can have my supervisor screaming in my ear to dump the call because I've been on the phone for 13 minutes, but I'm talking to Susan and she can't connect to her Wi-Fi and I'm not going to leave this call until I know she's connected, and that's my mission today. And so screw you, supervisor, I'm going to do what I know is right for the customer. And so they were getting frustrated, but they then started to dig into the data and they had a call metric time. And interestingly, the younger cohorts that were far more compliant with the rules and competitive around achieving the KPIs, mysteriously, the calls would just disconnect just before the time limit, and then a new call would come through. So, that Susan in that example would have been disconnected because the call wasn't resolved. She then repeats call back. She's then a complaint. She's then an irate customer, not knowing why the call cut out halfway through the conversation. And it was because all around the wrong KPI.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a lot about organizations and why it's important for them, but I want to circle back to the individual. Yeah. So I'm an individual, have like 30 years of career experience. And I feel that my success criteria is different. What I care about is different. The climbing up, is no longer interesting to me. Plus the rate of change and speed of change and the things that are happening in the environment, right? I'm not even sure I understand how to stay relevant or that I want to keep doing what I'm doing. What would you have me do now?
Well, I'd have you read The Age Rebellion, for starters, because it's exactly why I wrote it. And often we have to shake off some of the things that we tell ourselves in our head. So we tell ourselves things such as our best years are behind us, rather than that our best years are in front of us. We tell ourselves things such as, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that anymore. But we don't give any thought around what we do want to do, because we've spent our lives, really by the time we're in midlife, being supportive to other people's whims. So
nobody taught us to ask what we want to do.
Exactly. It was always about other people, and it was about, career progression. And so in your early life, it's about, getting on the step ladder, getting your first home, getting into a relationship, supporting other people. And then people emerge typically in their mid-50s, and they're like, okay, it's finally my time. And just when it feels like my time and I'm ready to get going and I'm ready to lean in, then the world is checking me out as if I'm somehow on the scrap heap. But I don't quite know how to articulate what I want going forward. And so I firmly believe that people need inspiration. And so one of the mechanisms that I do that in the Age Rebellion is by citing age rebels from all over the world, normal people who are changing career, going back to college. What did they do? Why did they do it? How did they do it? With some examples of how do you take where you are here and today and where you would really love to be and create the little footsteps that connect the two. So you've got a plan.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you to give me some of those examples of the people that made major transitions later in life, but not, not the ones who build multi-billion-dollar companies.
I mean, it's my brother, so it's one of my favorites. But my brother Darren is in the book. So he's 3 years older than me. So I'm level 48. I talk about ages and level. I find people like to go up levels. They don't necessarily like to go up ages. So I'm level 48 and my brother's 51. And so a couple of years ago, he's been working for Asda, which was Asda Walmart, the big grocery retailer, since he was 16. So 32, 33 years flew past, and I'd say 30 of them were pretty happy, building stores, becoming a general store manager, traveling around, doing good things. Then COVID hit. And running a grocery store in COVID was a tough gig. His wife, my sister-in-law's a nurse, so tough gig, 2 young kids. And it took a lot out of him. And so 2 years ago, he was flopped out on my sofa on Christmas Day asleep. And when he came around, he's like, if I have to spend another Christmas in a supermarket, I'm going to go mad. I'm just literally going to go mad. I don't just not like it anymore. I hate it and I feel trapped. But what else can I do? I've worked in a supermarket since I'm 16. I don't know anything else. I don't know even any other company. So what can I possibly do?
And that's the phase in life when you know what you don't want, but you don't know what you do want.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you move out from there?
So I set him a deal. I was like, right, New Year's Day, once you cleared the hangover, you're coming over and I'm doing a deal. We're going to work out your ikigai. Have you ever heard of ikigai before?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So for those of you that are listening that haven't, it's the Japanese way of finding your meaning, finding your purpose. And it is I believe, a methodology that you can follow. You can really break it down and make it really simple, where you start to write lists of, what are you good at? What do you love doing? What does the world need? What can you get paid for? And you start to see the connections in a different way to what you had. And so we went through this process and we went right back to when Darren was a kid and he loved science books, really interested in science, the body and how it all worked. That was all he used to read, David Attenborough programs, and that was his thing. He did travel and tourism at college, but never went to university, whereas I went to university, but he got offered this management training job. And so he joined work. And he always felt that he missed out on that university experience. That was something that was missing out in his life. But he felt very conscious that he had 2 small children, my nieces, and how do you get past this? And so we narrowed it down to a few years ago, so 10 years ago, our dad lost his hearing when he turned 70. Went to bed with hearing, woke up the next morning, no hearing, had a sudden onset deafness, all the hairs in your ear die. But my brother was the one that lived closest, so he took him to his oncology appointments and eventually got a cochlear implant and saw the magic of switching hearing back on and how transformative that is. So long story short, Nirit, is that he resigned his role at Asda. He got a job at Specsavers, who are a global franchise. They do audiology and optical, who sponsored him to go back to university to become a qualified audiologist, so he could be a hearing specialist. He's just graduated from De Montfort University in his 50s and got that. He took a massive pay cut for 2 years, but was paid to go through university, and they sponsored the degree.
And why did they, so that's his perspective, why did they take him?
Yeah, I know, I'll share that. And then where he is now, he's just bought 3 stores. So he's just bought 3 franchises. So he's one of those first-time entrepreneurs. He's back in retail, but in small box retail, and he is loving life and earning back where he was. from a Specsaver's perspective, they had identified that they are a franchise model. They need people that want to become partners and grow their business around the world, but they were only hiring qualified audiologists or qualified optometrists. So they were getting people out of university who were young, who loved the technical side, but didn't understand marketing, HR, sales, customer service, running a business, P&L. So they were trying to reverse engineer it and take a specialist person and teach them to be a general manager. Whereas I said to them, well, why don't we reverse it? Why don't we take people who are great general managers? Perhaps they've been running restaurants, perhaps they've been running retail stores. They understand that, and then go teach them the technical side, underwrite their qualification, guarantee them a job, give them a pay and a pathway that they can get back to earning within 2 years at the same level. And strangely enough, you can very easily teach somebody technical skills in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah, and I think
have the best bang of all of it.
And the beautiful story here is from the individual listening to us right now is you've always got, I call them bridging skills, right? The skills that are not directly tied to your profession or job, right? That everyone needs. It's you know how to work in organization, you know how to work with customers, you know how to work with teams. I mean, there's all these generic things that are really, really hard to teach. And like you said, technical skills might actually be.
It says like negotiation skills. Well, if you've ever, convinced a child to eat broccoli, then you've got negotiation skills. You don't need to go on a course. You've developed it through your life, So
as we kind of start wrapping up here, I'm wondering if there's one idea from the age rebellion that you hope becomes mainstream, what would that be?
So I want to get people into this mindset of designing a life that they never want to retire from. So we've been sold a trap. Retirement is, in my very strong opinion, it's a trap. It's bad for our health. It's bad for our wealth. And that doesn't mean that you just keep working until you drop, but it means that you have to have purposeful endeavor that challenges you, that grows you throughout all of your years of life. You can't just have your engaged years and then you sit back and see what happened years, because it's just really bad for us. So I want to retire the term retirement, Nirit. I think it doesn't serve us as humans, as industries. And I want people to really get on board with designing a life that they never want to retire from.
That's fabulous. So one last question that I always wrap up with, Lyndsey, is what do you think is the question we should all be asking ourselves about the future of work?
Oh, well, this is a really easy one for me to answer. Given 50% of babies born today are going to live to at least 104, and if you're 50 years old today, you've got an odds-on chance of being well into your 90s and beyond. The question is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, that's fabulous. And by the way, the answer cannot be one single.
No, and it doesn't even have to bear any resemblance to what you've done up until this point. You can start again, you can go again, you can do and be anything you want to be. And for those that feel trapped, those that are in an industry that doesn't feel is giving them the love at the moment, I promise you there are so many industries that need new talent of every age. The green energy industry and revolution there, it's a complete level playing field. Nobody's been in green energy before, so everybody of every age can skill into it. There's so many opportunities, but we have to fix what's in our own head first and our own limitations around what we can and can't do. But I think if you just start thinking about if you were 15 again and you were making that decision, what do I want to be when I grow up? Keep asking yourself that question at least every single decade.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lyndsey, for joining me today. Gave me a lot to think about. For more about Lyndsey Simpson and 55 Redefined, as well as the Age Rebellion, check out the links in the episode description. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow The Future of Less Work wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, your best people do not work because they have to. They do not work because you tell them to, or even because you measure them on it. They work because they want to, because by working for you, they're doing what's important to them in life. Till next time.